Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to use some Greek mythology as illustration for my lecture. I can see you smiling. Are you good, man? We use the mythology of Theseus and Ariadne. Theseus is a hero, and the next one would be Perseus, who's a rescuer. And some men confuse the difference between being a hero and being a rescuer. Ariadne was an independent princess or priestess, and her love and assistance to her hero to guide his way through the labyrinth and then slay the Minotaur. On the other hand, we have Perseus, who was a rescuer with a damsel in distress because she willingly sacrificed herself to the sea monster. So if we can keep the archetypes of the hero and the rescuer apart. First, let's just have a look at the rescuer and the psychodynamics. It is a neurological approach. In other words, what happens in the brain of these two people. Firstly, if we look at the hypothalamus is passed to your limbic system, the emotional system of the brain. It forms a peptide, which means that the rescuer creates the need to rescue oversensitive, dependent, and emotionally unstable women. He will call that towards him. The rescuers, as Professor Jaeger said, the motivation or the cause behind this, the cause is the deep-seated guilt complexes that he experiences because he fears of disappointing his mother and also failing in his duty as a hero to provide and to protect. If we look at the basic greatest fears of the two genders, a man's greatest fear is to disappoint a woman. A woman's greatest fear is to be abandoned by the man. Rescuers are subconsciously attracted to narcissistic women because it provides them a welcome alternative to the other type of woman who makes him the alpha and omega of her existence. So, in this case, where this is a narcissistic woman, then to him, if he can fulfill her needs, then he will be the hero. Some rescuers as well, they might prefer broken women because the more mature, stable women are a threat to their egos. Now, unlike Theseus, this rescuer negotiates the labyrinth, but when he figures out what pleases him, she will place an obstacle in the path. There is no order. There is no path, there is no route. What pleases her today will irritate her tomorrow. He will never reach the epicenter of the labyrinth. He will never be rewarded the peace and the tranquility of the mature relationship. Eventually, he will sink down and he will cover his face, and he can no longer endure the fertility of the madness of trying to please her. In my practice, I see many men like this, and eventually they just cover the face because they don't know what to do to please the woman. He brought her flowers yesterday, she was happy, brings her flowers today, she complains he's spending too much money. There's just no way out. Okay, it's like the rat. The random conditioning where this fits in as well, in an experiment we found that every time the rat pressed the lever, it gets a pellet. The moment the dispenser completely stops to dispense the pellets, he becomes despondent and he gives up. But boy oh boy, if that dispenser randomly, every now and again, you don't know when, gives him a pellet, he becomes addicted to it. And this is the same way. He tries to please her because every now and again, maybe, she'll be happy. He gets a smile. So the rescuer will desperately continue to attempt to please her just to experience the random, unpredictable reward of her approval. He becomes addicted to this rare euphoria of her occasional goodwill, despite the absolute confusion and destruction of the daily discontent. Some of the quotes of the rescuers: no matter if you turn right or left, it's always wrong. I felt I was always in trouble, no matter what. Everything was never good enough, no matter how hard I try. Loving her was living in a big black hole. She remains the center of the hole, and you get sucked into the nothingness until you lose yourself completely. Oxytocin, as we know, is a very potent neurotransmitter. It's called the Cuddle Hormone. It's released during orgasm, it inhibits memory consolidation, and it increases positive social memory. What this means is when we are happy and we release oxytocin, we don't think rational with our mind. This is why teenagers and even adults in love will send naked pictures of themselves over the phone. We know you shouldn't do that, but you feel so good of the oxytocin that you do. Don't. Okay. When she makes love to him, he forgets the bad times. The oxytocin will override the rational neocortex, which should warn him of the danger. Now let's look at some of the psychodynamics of the woman, the damsel in distress. The slide is a little bit half, right? We get your primitive thinking brain, which is your reptile brain, and then you get your emotional brain, and then you get the neocortex, the rational brain. The important one here is the red, which is your neocortex, the thinking brain, which distinguishes us from the animals. Your frontal cortex, as we know, is the CEO, the chief executive officer of the brain, and it provides us with a sense of identity. It makes the executive decisions, planning, speech, abstract thinking, working, short-term memory, concentration, etc. It is responsible for movement and some of the emotional areas. It's the part that makes us intelligent, caring human beings. Now, when we have a dysfunction in the frontal neocortex, it can lead to emotional instability, outbursts, temper tantrums, lack of emotion and empathy, rigid mindset and behavior, fearful withdrawal, and problems with concentration and memory. As we can see, these are many symptoms of your typical bipolar person. Inside the brain as well, in the neocortex, we have the ventral cingulate cortex. This integrates your cognitive and your emotional information. It's basically where your emotional intelligence is seated. So we can read other people's facial expressions and emotions and react to it. When it is damaged, it reduces our expression of empathy. This will explain the narcissistic behavior of this borderline woman when she's just focused on her own needs. And she shows no empathy for the suffering of the rescuer. She cannot see what she's doing to him. The anterior cingulate cortex is the conflict detector of the brain. It will alert us to conflicting or contradictory impulses of the brain. Can you remember the case of Patty Hearst, who was the millionaire's daughter, and she was kidnapped, and eventually she joined the kidnappers? This is what happens. It is activate when there are two totally opposite impulses simultaneously active in the brain, and it needs to be sorted out. So it's when we verbally declare something which is different from what we actually believe. So the dorsal anterior cingulated cortex will resolve this conflict. We need to maintain consistency in our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors. So the rescuer will subconsciously change how he actually feels about being abused. He will adapt to it, and he will tell himself something about it to maintain the consistency. They believe what they tell themselves. So in an abusive relationship, he will say, how can I allow somebody to treat me like this, although I am still here? And then he gets to the answer, well, it's not that bad. Well, actually, it is really bad. You need to run. All right. Our emotional brain, the limbic system, that's just part of it. The second one there you'll see is the amygdala, which is quite important. The amygdala is the part of our brain that attaches emotional significance to an event. Okay. The hippocampus will record the fact of the memory. The amygdala will record the emotional content. For instance, if we have not seen our loved one for 3 months and suddenly they appear in front of us, our body is in the sympathetic nervous system, okay, and we have joy. Although if you wake up in the middle of the night, especially in South Africa, and there is a burglar in your house, your body is in the same sympathetic system, and we attach fear to it. It is us that attach emotion to it. The body is the same. It's the amygdala. So the amygdala will attach the fear to the event. Emotional instability and cognitive impulsiveness is the behavioral manifestations of the amygdala. It reacts severely to negative stimuli. It causes an over-emotional overreaction, an explosion, and irrational destructive behavior. Now we will see with the victim women that they have overactive amygdala. Actually, if you look at it in the brain, the left part of it is bigger in size. If we look at serotonin, serotonin is the calming neurotransmitter. I say she's our harp player, she calms us down, she's considered as an antidepressant. Now the lack of serotonin in your frontal neocortex will inhibit the amygdala, and it impairs your ability to evaluate, to integrate, and to act on the clues from the environment. It prevents both of them to return to normal, healthy stimuli because there's not enough serotonin. Dopamine, I call Aphrodite. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter. She is the anticipation of pleasure. She will motivate you to move. Okay. In other words, if you are lying on the couch and you feel like a beer, she will motivate you to get up to go and fetch the reward. Right? It's the anticipation of it. Now, when the dopamine level as well in the amygdala fluctuate, it causes this extreme fear of rejection, the abandonment, which leads to total irrational behavior, loss of control, and violently acting out. They will also ask these men, "Don't ever leave me." It's the fear of abandonment. And he promises, "I will never leave you." But what he forgets is no amount of love can cure a chemical imbalance in the brain. Okay. Now, there we have a real hero. "Don't leave me," and he says, "Perhaps we'll meet again," because off he goes. Okay. As I said, the psychological phenomena of a disorganized attachment style is characterized by this ambivalent behavior. And as children, the women were emotionally impoverished, which literally causes an increase in the left side of the amygdala. I used the Greek mythology to explain the behavior of the women. She's a master manipulator. She will initially reward the rescuer with sex for rescuing her. Then she becomes pathologically possessive, paranoid, jealous. He has to report every move to her. It is a major catastrophe when she cannot get hold of him. Like an AK-47, an automatic rifle, she will SMS and WhatsApp him 1,000 of messages per minute. She deciphers the password. She deletes the friends from the Facebook. She installs a tracer in his car, and she intercepts the bank statements. When he wants to take a break and spend time with friends, she will cause some kind of problem for him to come home. When he threatens to leave, she will threaten to commit suicide. She manipulates him with guilt, and she randomly rewards him with a smile, or occasionally with sex. The narcissism constantly needs to feed on him. It consumes him, it drains him, and it destroys him. And she has no empathy for his hurt feelings or the fatigue, and she will never apologize because she's always the victim. To conquer, for the rescuer to move from rescuer to hero, maybe perhaps a good friend or a therapist can help him to get out of the maze because he cannot get out of it himself. He needs to walk away. He needs to abandon her. And when that happens, she's going to turn up the volume. And he needs to be somewhere where somebody can help him to resist this avalanche of her wrath. Metaphorically, he has to decapitate Medusa, come to terms with his guilt, overcome the regret and the fear of being a disappointment. He needs to know he will never please her. She will always raise the bar. If you want to feel good, you have to get rid of bad feelings. You have to let go. He needs to find the true hero himself to become the provider and the protector of a woman that can appreciate him and be worthy of his love. I always tell them not to waste his valuable heroism on a bottomless pit. For her to become the adorable goddess, nobody is exempt from pain or loneliness or heartbreak or loss or rejection or abandonment or ridicule in various forms or intensities. To the women who recognize themselves as the damsel in distress, they need to find a therapist to work through the pain, to guide them, to liberate them from unrealistic expectancies, to develop insight in their manipulative and destructive behavior, and to find the true goddess inside themselves, so that they keep a man not by manipulation, but because he adores her and he wants to be with her. I've written a book which is going to become a web page, Heroes, Psychological Insight into Men's Views on Relationships. It will be available sometime during the year. Okay. It will be called Heroes, Warriors. Okay. All right. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you very much. If you have any question from the audience? Nobody? Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to ask if you have any experience in working with gay couples.
Well, yes, I do.
And you are also using the same metaphors? And,
no, I use different metaphors.
Ah, okay.
Yes, I work with both male and female gay couples. Different metaphors. The principle is the same, but the story is different.
Thank you. Anybody?
I think the advice for a person to disengage from a dysfunctional relationship is a very good one. Unfortunately, in my clinical practice, I have found that people usually do not follow it. They are very hooked into the dynamic. I wanted to know if you've had a higher success rate.
They are initially, they come to you when they are completely broken. And then we start working with them, with the dynamics, and especially if I explain to them the neuropsychological aspect of it, they start understanding what's happening to them and with the women. And then obviously sometimes it happens he gets a pellet again, and she's sweet to him. And then he goes back. All right. And then he stays there for a few months, and he keeps on telling him, but it's not that bad, and as long as she's on her medication, etc. And then one day you just get this frantic call and they're back again. Okay. And you walk the road with them. Okay. And then it doesn't happen easily. Because sometimes what also happens is the women get pregnant and they tie them with children. But eventually they get it. You know, through the therapy, they get it. And then they walk away. And that's why I say I've got some recovering rescuers. And then they also very easily identify the women next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? Thank you very much.
Our next speaker.